Aphrodite will ensure that the beings of our empire are more fertile to guarantee an increase in the population, while Yggdrasil, as the one who will be most affected, will remain here for observation so that, in case of any unforeseen consequences, adjustments can be made. The Heavenly Father is here so that the same fertility blessing can be applied to his angels to allow them to reproduce at an accelerated rate. Hela, as the one who has the most control over souls out of anyone else in this room, will ensure that the souls of the citizens of the empire do not leave Darling's influence and that the memories of the gods are erased when they die. I will maintain order in everything and force reality to keep everything running smoothly with my divinity. Think of me as the first line of defense against reality itself and the one who will ensure everything functions as expected. Violet looked at Natalia, and finally, Natalia. You are the MVP of this situation. It is with your power that we'll be able to make this crazy plan come to fruition. Your mastery over space and time will be the foundations that support everything that will happen, and your job will be to expand your influence to strategic points. Turning her gaze to the group, she spoke. Of course, that's not all. I've already given orders to Persephone, Thanatos, and Nyx to aid Hela in her role. Aline, despite being busy helping Velnora, will also participate as a side project. My demonic sisters, Lily, Lilith, and Helena, will be on standby to evacuate all of our people, and those who are not hostile, to the other strongholds of the Empire while also acting to leave only those considered as unstable elements on Earth. All those loyal to the Empire will go to Alexandria in Hell or the city of Velnora. Several sounds of groans of pain were heard as their names were called. The crown floating on Violet's head stopped glowing, and in the next moment, she spoke. What I just gave you was the information about the future that I obtained through observation. Don't use this information as absolute truth, the future is not set in stone. Just as the Emperor said, the future can and will change. Just use this information as a reference. Questions? A lot of them, Ruby spoke, representing everyone's feelings. I know. Violet sighed. For starters, how will my angels reproduce? They're supposed to be asexual. The Heavenly Father asked. Through soul manipulation, we can adjust the physiology of the angels on a large scale so that, every 1,000 years, a new light will split off from the angels. And from that new light, a new angel will be born. This process is only possible because angels, at their core, are essentially spirit of lights, and spirits are basically souls without a vessel. If this were to be done on other beings, we would need to use the divinity of dreams, creation, and reality distortion, and the process would be a lot more invasive and could result in massive consequences to the individuals changed. Of course, half of this information was a lie. With Victor's powers, he could turn the soul of a stone into an angel if he wanted to. The soul would lack substance, but that was something Victor could easily solve. However, they didn't need to know that. The duration of 1,000 years between each instance of what is essentially a form of mitosis is necessary for the optimal amount of light elemental energy to accumulate within the angels naturally. We can't reduce the time frame any lower, or the angels born from the process will be too weak and without future potential. These words were true. If they wanted fighters with the potential to become seraphim or even angels like Ariel, who were like gods without concepts, that sort of time frame was necessary. Of course, this time frame could be cut down by more than half if Victor used his soul powers. In fact, he could even make them reproduce every 100 years and artificially increase their light so that they would all have great powers. But the Empire would not do this. After all, the angels were not completely united with the Empire. Perhaps in the future, when all the angels took Victor's words more fervently than they did the Heavenly Father's, they would consider doing this. But for now, this arrangement was enough. The Heavenly Father wondered why he had never thought of this before. Even if he could not manipulate souls like the Emperor, he could use the remaining energy from his creations to make an angel that would reproduce every 1,000 years so that their ranks would slowly be filled. We will envelop the 7 heavens in the same time mechanism so that the angels' ranks will be filled up. Initially, the Heavenly Father would not have been involved in this plan, but Violet saw the value in letting her allies grow and fight. In this way, not only would they integrate into the Empire, but the Empire would also gain new strength. Thus killing 2 birds with just 1 stone. This plan works for you, right? After all, I'm sure you don't want your children engaging in orgies in heaven to create new angels. Not to mention that this way, most of your angels' repressed desires will be satisfied. That's a lie. Maybe the desires for reproduction, family, and home will be fulfilled, but the other feelings won't be. As the angels interact more with the Empire, we will slowly introduce these concepts to them. The moment they feel the pleasure of freedom, they won't want to return to the gilded cage that the Heavenly Father imprisoned them in, Violet thought. It may seem pointless for Violet to formulate these plans against the angels. After all, they were allies. But only a fool would think so. There was no such thing as allies, only common interests and the fear of the bigger fist that was Victor. The only true allies that they had were their own family and those subordinates who'd sacrificed even their souls in exchange for eternal servitude. These were the allies of the Empire. The rest were just temporary allies based on the current circumstances. Eventually, they would need to be completely won over and integrated into the Empire. Rebellious elements would not be tolerated. Any possible seeds of rebellion needed to be completely erased and eliminated. As Empress, it was her duty to maintain the order of the Empire while her husband, the Emperor, continued to walk towards the future. Victor was the spear that always advanced forward, and she was the shield that protected and held everything together when he was not looking. Because of this, she was daughter in its purest form. But I must say, it is a waste of potential. Violet thought as she assessed the situation. Of the angels and demons. Unlike the demons, who only continued to grow in number over time, either through creating new demons amongst themselves, acquiring evil beings from other hells, or transforming other beings into demons, the angels had remained stagnant all this time. Their numbers did not grow at all, and this was due to the rule of the Heavenly Father and his own weakness. After all, this fact was proven by Velnora herself when she evaluated Ariel's physiology. Victor could easily impregnate her. The requirement to impregnate an angel was that the partner's soul was strong enough to unite with the angels in order to produce offspring. In actuality, the angels themselves had been created with all the necessary biological tools to be capable of reproducing amongst themselves like any other species without the need for this change. But unfortunately, the Heavenly Father forbade it. Vehemently, NOVLB //JNN. Which leads to his weakness. Because he no longer had the ability to create more angels due to abusing his creation divinity in the past, he could no longer replenish their ranks whenever an angel died. Yet, even after realizing this, even after witnessing the declining population of his creations, he still refused to adapt and continued enforcing the old rules he had initially set in place. Unlike the other divinities, creation had a kind ergi quota. Here each deity of creation was allocated a certain amount of creation points and was restricted to merely what they had initially received. And it was with these artificially limited resources that they forged their creations, where the more points used in one creation, the less they'd have for others, requiring them to balance quality in order to achieve their desired quantity. To put it simply, this divinity was under the strict control and regulation of the primordials, and if the limit set for a creation deity was exceeded, they would intervene. The proof of this was when Victor decided to create the Leviathans, two primordials immediately arrived to see if they needed to intervene. Everything that was created would always be immediately evaluated by the primordials. And if their interference was deemed necessary, they would withdraw or empty the energy reserves of the divinity allocated to the offending deity. Violet didn't know what the Heavenly Father did to lose his powers of creation, and she didn't particularly care either. She only cared about the fact that her husband could get around this restriction a little because of the divinity of dreams. And even if the primordials wanted to, they could never take away his ability to create. After all, this ability didn't just stem from the divinity of creation that he'd received as a wedding gift from Amaterasu. Victor was an eldritch chaos, the same type of being as Azathoth. And, as an eldritch chaos, creating new beings was an innate ability of his species. It was in his nature. However, the beings created through this innate ability of his would inevitably be beautifully distorted, taking the form of all manners of insanity-inducing cosmic horrors. Because of this, he avoided using this energy and mainly used the divinity of creation that he'd received from Amaterasu. This bond between the two creation abilities has completely ingrained the power of creation into Victor. Speaking of angels, Ariel immediately came to mind. That's another element Darling needs to deal with. He needs to fuck her immediately and get her pregnant. Violet thought. Because they were so busy, the family hadn't had time to broach this topic. Yet. The Heavenly Father nodded in agreement with Violet's words. As long as the angels could increase their numbers passively, and he didn't need to change the rules. He'd made for heaven, he was fine with this setup. And Bradata ran her hand like a timid child but couldn't hit a har amukad emila. Yes? Violet spoke. Increase fertility? She asked innocently, her eyes shining like a child who didn't know about the birds and the bees, but a glint of amusement could be seen in her eyes. Violet felt her face, and practiced imperial smile, twitch when she heard Aphrodite's question. As I said before. We need to increase our numbers. Humanity lost over 85% of its population during the demonic invasion, and many supernatural races whose talents would have been great for the Empire have gone extinct. Using your fertility blessing in tandem with Victor's creation, we will bring back all these extinct races and increase everyone's numbers. For every pregnant woman, I want each of them to have at least twins or triplets. The gestation period should also be shortened as well through our enhancements and blessings. Formulating the words in her head to come out as neutrally as possible, she spoke. We'll instate a family formation policy with all the necessary incentives. The more an exceptional individual participates in acts of procreation, the more resources the Empire will provide them according to the number of children they produce. They will also be encouraged to increase their strength so that their improved genes are passed on. Of course, these benefits will apply to both sexes, and harems should be widely supported as long as the individual is special and can care for their family. Aphrodite blinked her eyes, genuinely surprised by what she was hearing. She had initially only been teasing Violet, but she didn't expect the plans to go so deep. Hestia and Rhea will love this setup, and Hera will deeply hate it as the goddess of marriage. Aphrodite laughed. That's her problem. The Empire won't stop just because someone's offended. Violet spoke pragmatically. Aphrodite nodded in amusement and then spoke seriously, entering her goddess mode and acting in the capacity of a sister of the Empress. Very well. In that case, I propose that not only I, but every fertility deity from every pantheon participate in this plan. I also want the mother goddesses involved in the plan. They will help ensure that each pregnancy is an easy process and not as arduous as it usually is. That way, we will be able to increase our numbers easily without compromising the integrity of the individuals in question. Aphrodite finished while thinking, it's time to make that lazy girl come out of her comfortable shell. She thought of Gaia, who was taking care of Victor's planet and doing a few other productive things. Not that her work wasn't important. After all, half of the animals on the planet were Made by Gaia. But, compared to her sisters, Gaia was having a much easier time. Your proposals are sound. I will communicate them to my executor. Violet spoke as. She passed on the orders to Morgana, who was acting as the executor of the Imperial Will while the Empress was busy. It was a role that could be assigned to any of the sisters who were available at the time. Currently, Morgana was the one who was the most free, so Violet took her as her executor. While working on his runic formula, formed from a set of draconic runes of power that would serve as the basis for everything, Victor couldn't help but display a proud smile when he saw Violet's behavior. They grow up so fast. He was very proud of Violet's evolution. She'd grown into an exceptional empress. Finishing up the first section of runes, Victor created another section and began writing again. This time, he was inscribing eldritch runes into the formula for greater efficiency. These words were few, just one character among hundreds, but just that one character was enough to have great power. I need to maintain the image of a great veil. These runes are parts of a large whole. That will encompass the entire galaxy. Essential points will need to be placed on each planet, forming a blanket that will cover everything without interfering with the flow of time. Victor made mental calculations while maintaining the image of a large cloth. That would cover all the key points of the galaxy, these key points being the planets inhabited by world trees. There is no way this can be finished in a month or even any time this year. The overarching preparations, the framework of it all, can be finished in just a few days. But the smaller, more critical components and nuances, the finer details to actually make this thing functional, will take at least 2 to 5 years to complete. Victor predicted, taking into account the capacity of all his allies. And that was actually really fast for a project of this magnitude and scale. Normally, this kind of ambitious project could take hundreds of years or even millennia to complete. Victor had many talented allies that made the project challenging but not impossible to complete in such a time frame. In fact, they would be making really good time. Ugh, this is going to be a long job. Every little action now would need to take into account how the universe normally operated. He would have to make everything work without anything out of the ordinary being discovered by the natural flow of the universe. That way, the universe would not treat it as something unnatural and would naturally accept it. Do I need to include the stars in this veil too? Yes, of course I do. The star of each system is an important part of life on a planet. Wait, not just the star. I need to include the whole damn solar system of each conquered planet in order to account for the gravitational linkage between each celestial body. Ugh. I have to put the whole solar system where the planets are located in the veil, or everything will fall apart. More work, I guess. He sighed internally. Thus, with these new factors that he needed to account for, he created another section of runes and worked on both at the same time. While he was focused on his work, making use of his super-efficient mind to inscribe the runes and, at the same time, predict the possible outcomes his runes would create, he heard something that made his hands stop for a few seconds. Individual chaos has understood a critical facet of creation. Calculating previous discoveries and accumulated understanding of the individual. Individual chaos has understood a major critical facet of creation. Ranking of the individual chaos has the increased. Victor raised an eyebrow when he heard this voice in his head. He swiftly accessed system, more precisely speaking, the section that displayed the ranks of beings in the cosmos and saw that his position had increased tremendously. He'd practically skipped the entire line and entered the top 70. 69, chaos. Nice, Victor laughed internally. Personally, he didn't care about this ranking, but this ranking gave a parameter of how many beings knew the processes of the universe. Like he did. Ignoring this, Victor went back to work. Finishing contacting Morgana and passing on orders, Violet asked everyone, any more questions? A lot of them. Ruby said as she walked towards Violet. Seeing her childhood friend's furious impetus, Violet held herself back from sighing. She knew she would have to talk a lot today. After all, her childhood friend never liked it when she didn't know things. She couldn't help but look at Victor with resentment. Over this matter. After all, he was the one who had brought her into this matter so abruptly. She had been in the middle of performing her typical duties as Empress when her husband suddenly gave her the order to look into the future before dropping this massive project in her lap. In response to her resentment-filled glare, all Victor did was smile beautifully at her, a smile that filled her heart with joy and made butterflies dance in Violet's stomach. Damn sexy bastard. I'll get my payback for this in bed. Just you wait. She growled. Edited by Davo21. As Victor's group studied the mechanism Victor wanted to create, Anna, who had just received a report on this plan, narrowed her eyes. A veil that encompasses the entire galaxy, huh? My husband sure is ambitious. Currently, Anna was in their personal world. She'd stayed here to keep tabs on her daughters while Victor and her other sisters organized the empire. It was a job she was very much needed for, considering that having someone who could force the truth out with just their presence was excellent when dealing with competitive brats.n/o/vel/b/jn.c/c/om. That being said, since the recent training, the children had been much calmer than before, even the ones who were always causing trouble. Reading more into the subtle details of the plan, she couldn't help but say with a frown, the amount of energy required for such a feat is ridiculous. Going against the flow of time is an impossible task, even for normal gods. She laughed lightly afterward. Fortunately, we are not normal gods. Anna was absolutely certain that Victor's plan would work. After all, he wouldn't begin ventures if they didn't have a chance to succeed. Anna stopped looking at the report in front of her and looked towards the door when she felt two of her daughters approaching. She waved her hand, and the report disappeared into thin air. Then she said, "Don't wait at the door. Come in." A moment of silence fell in the room, and then the door opened, revealing the two princesses, Gina Elderblood, Gaia's daughter with Victor, and Stella Elderblood, her daughter with Victor. "Stella, Gina, my beloved daughters, why the sudden visit? Not that I'm upset. After all, it's good to have my daughter's company to entertain this old lady." Gina restrained herself from rolling her eyes at her mother's words, a feat that Stella couldn't help but replicate. "Mother, for an ageless being, you sure are funny." She snorted. Anna couldn't help but let out a small smirk. "Well, it's precisely because we are ageless beings that we must behave like noble ladies, isn't it? We can't be like certain people who look like young adults but act like children." "Are you talking about Mother Pepper?" Stella asked, genuinely curious. Anna had wanted to take a slight jab at her daughter but ended up drawing friendly fire towards her fellow sister. "Maybe," Anna spoke slowly as if she was considering her answer, as she leaned back in her chair and bent her legs, showing off her black garter belt. "So? Why are you here?" The two sisters looked at each other and then looked at Anna. "We want to help our father," Stella spoke diplomatically. Anna's smile trembled slightly when she heard these words. Instead of immediately denying her daughter's request, she looked at them seriously and asked, "I know you want to help Victor, but tell me, realistically speaking, how do you plan on going about doing that?" Seeing that they had no answer to that, Anna spoke slowly and in a disarming tone. "Gina, you're very good at fighting, and you're a good handler, I don't deny that, but in the Empire, we have our elite soldiers, we have billions of demons at our disposal to fight for us, we have dragons, leviathans, and we have Scat-Hack." When she said dragons, she looked at the two attendants who were also protectors of her daughters who were outside the room. Even if they were simple dragons, they could fight against second-generation primordial gods due to the boost that Victor gave them. They weren't weak at all, not to mention that if her daughters left this planet, they would, 100% of the time, be accompanied by the shadow demons, or by the members of the Blank clan. Even Victor's heralds were always keeping an eye on them if they decided to leave the planet. Victor didn't play around with their safety. "Stella, just like Gina, you have matured very well in your recent training. The talents that you received from me to bend reality and sense falsehood, and the martial talents that you received from your father, as well as the blood domain that you possess, have undoubtedly become stronger. You are definitely formidable. But, it is still not enough. The Empire is vast." With a wave of her hand, a sphere-shaped hologram appeared on Anna's desk and then expanded. "And our forces are enormous, and as Imperial princesses, you must always be an example to be followed. You must keep in mind that any action or word will reflect directly on the Emperor." These words were an absolute fact. It was no wonder that even the women most prone to doing troublesome things behaved completely in public. A perfect example of this is the Empress herself. Violet's violent temper was well known in Victor's inner circle, but she could not act like that anymore as Empress. She hadn't lost her essence. The Violet that everyone knows was still there. Much calmer and more rational, but she was still there, and yet, she can't even act like she normally does in front of everyone. The same applied to Victor himself. Typically, he was a laid-back guy who liked to joke around, but when faced with his responsibilities, he couldn't afford to be like that and had to present himself as the Emperor. There was a reason why all the members, when they appeared in public, were in their imperial forms or god forms that were 4 to 5 meters tall, showing all their draconic characteristics. Presentation, manner of acting, and expressions, all of these were important when dealing with the masses. And as imperial princesses, the daughters of the Emperor himself, they needed to behave according to that image. Seeing that her words hadn't changed her daughter's determined expression, Anna sighed and broke the mask of seriousness a little. With a wave of her hand, the hologram disappeared from in front of them. "My daughters, to be honest, we really don't want you to enter the wider world right now." "Why, mother?" Gina asked. "I could tell you that you should enjoy your childhood and your freedom, but that would be a lie," Anna said. "The real reason is that this world is oppressive." "Huh? Behaving properly, presenting yourself properly, always keeping up a mask of royalty, the endless reports. The Empire is constantly changing, and we have to keep up with this change. A change that comes much faster than any normal empire. After all, we are very competent." Anna laughed proudly. "It's hard work and truly mentally exhausting, even for us, as dragon gods. That's the real reason, at least one of them. The secondary reason is that we really don't need you right now." "Ugh." Stella and Gina put their hands over their hearts as if they were being stabbed. Anna laughed. "My words are harsh, but they are true. In this early stage of the Empire, we need to keep everything in perfect condition, and we have to follow your father's orders to the letter. Failure is not an option. After all, a failure can give off the impression that the Empire is not that competent. At least in the early years, we must be a growing monster. Do you understand?" "Yes." Gina and Stella spoke, a little disappointed, but not unexpectedly. At least this time they'd received a proper explanation. It wasn't like the other times when they simply received a no or small excuses. This was proof that their parents recognized their efforts to grow. Anna sighed. She felt bad seeing her daughter's expressions, but she simply couldn't let her daughters interfere now. The empire needed to grow and lay down its roots. She couldn't allow people whose capabilities she didn't completely trust to take on important jobs. The third real reason Anna didn't tell her daughters is that she didn't trust her daughters. Specifically, she didn't trust her daughters' abilities to not mess up under constant pressure, and she didn't trust their young dragon blood. She knew her offspring very well, and Stella, if she was too stressed, would just throw her hands up and scream, "Fuck you." And she would drop everything. Gina showed more patience, but like her sister, she had a tendency to be quick to anger as well. And if there was one thing that running an empire did to a being, it was stressing them out, especially a competent empire like the one her family controlled. Ironically, most of these problems were due to the personality that the daughters received from their father when he was younger, and the temperament found in all dragons. Victor didn't have much patience when he was younger, either. She remembered very well the time when he gave his teacher a middle finger because he was furious. It didn't help that Anna was also like that when she was younger. They just learned to control themselves more as they got older. "It's unfair." Akasha came back and immediately started working, "but we can't do anything." Small tears formed on Stella's face. Akasha, huh? Her new daughter was a source of pride and concern. After all, being their daughter and assuming such an important position in the empire made the other sisters competitive too. They also wanted to help their father. Akasha, as a being created directly by Victor, was very competent. She was in charge of the entire administration of the empire, a fact that was a cause for concern for Anna. After all, even if she was created for this, it was still an exhausting job. At least not now, but when the empire in the future spans several galaxies, I will have to keep an eye on her. Anna thought. "My love. Darling?" Anna was surprised by the sudden call, although her expression did not change externally. "Form a squad of our daughters, and let them observe how the empire works. Give them temporary authorization from the G5 level and below. I will send my heralds to ensure their security. Let them travel throughout the empire." "You are too soft, darling." Anna knew very well that these orders were given due to Gina's and Stella's genuine expressions of sadness. "I know." Victor sighed. "But I don't mind. After all, unlike before, when they had simply wanted to do it just for the sake of doing it, now I see a genuine intention to help. And in regards to their practical skills, the training in the dream world has yielded quite a lot of results." That's true, she could see that too. Before, when their daughters asked to help in the faction, they could see that they merely had feelings of curiosity, stemming from a sense of boredom. It was like a child who was interested in their father's work but wasn't really that interested. Now, they genuinely wanted to contribute, and it was not just feelings of curiosity. Not to mention that, eventually, they will have to take that step anyway. After all, as my daughters, they will take over as rulers of planets or even galaxies in the future, depending on their competence. Victor knew that not all of them were proficient in governing, even if they were trained for it from a young age. Managing something was very different from fighting, and few people really had what it took to manage an entire planet alone, something that can be changed in the future. After all, Victor was not born knowing how to do the things he knows now. The same applied to Anna, who needed extensive training from Hilda about nobility. The difference between parents and daughters was motivation. With enough motivation, they could literally do anything. Since they were the Emperor's daughters, they had a lot of talent and untapped potential. "Rejoice, my daughters." "Huh? Your father spoke to me after hearing our conversation. He has allowed you to take on jobs in the Empire." Gina and Stella's faces lit up immediately. Before the two daughters could get too excited, Anna said, but completely breaking their momentum, she then spoke very seriously without room for argument, "You will take on lesser jobs. Your most important task is to observe. Observe how your parents do things, observe the growing empire that you will help grow in the future, your sisters, and I see you acting in a manner unbecoming of an imperial princess. If I see you disrupting the order, if I see you disrupting the plans of our subordinates, I will immediately send you back, and you will stay at home for 500 years. Do you understand?" "Yes, mother."